My name is Amanda Glass, and I am a special education attorney at the Arizona Center for Disability Law. I want to thank you all for joining us for this first session in a three-part series on education in light of COVID-19 school closures. I would really like to thank the organizations that have partnered with the Arizona Center for Disability Law to make this webinar series possible: Raising Special Kids, the University of Arizona's University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, and Northern Arizona University's Institute for Human Development. Thank you all for your support and collaboration on this project. Today's session is a listening session where we want to hear from parents, families, and students about their experiences with distance learning while schools have been closed. We know that there are many teachers and professionals on the call today, and we appreciate your interest, but we ask that you please allow this time to be used by students, parents, and families to share their stories, questions, and concerns. And we hope that you will benefit from listening to those as well. For those who are joining us through Zoom on a device, please take a moment and find the chat box function. And we are going to take this time to make sure you can find it and that it's working for you. So I ask that when you find the chat box, please go ahead and type your name and let us know if you are a student, a parent, a family member, or a professional. And if you're a professional, if you could include the name of your agency or organization. For example, if I were chatting in the box, I would type Amanda Glass, professional, the Arizona Center for Disability Law. So please take just a few moments to go ahead and do that. Great, and I see a number of people are doing it. I'm gonna keep talking, but please go ahead and continue typing. A few times during this session, we're gonna be using a really cool feature called instant polling. And that's going to allow us to ask all participants a question, and you will be able to respond through your device, and then we can share the overall results with the entire group. So I'm going to give you a couple more seconds to finish typing in the chat box, and then we're actually going to try that out before we start the listening part of the listening session so that we all have a chance to try it and troubleshoot if we're having trouble. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Jeff to please make that first instant polling question available to everyone, and let's see how it works. All right, so you should see pop up on your screen that asks, where are you from? Or de donde eres? And there, we've only done 3 options to kind of keep it regional, but we're looking to see, are you in Northern Arizona, Central Arizona, or Southern Arizona? We've got about 75 participants have voted. Let's see if we can get almost 100%. All right, it looks like right now, the majority are from Central Arizona, but we have a good amount from both Northern and Southern Arizona. So right now, with 72% of polls returned, we have 13% of our participants are from Northern Arizona, 66 of our participants are from Central Arizona, 21% are in Southern Arizona. Awesome. So we didn't get to 100% participation, but we got at 75%, which is pretty good. 76. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll now, but thank you all for participating, and do keep an eye out for that throughout the session. We're gonna do it a couple more times just to keep everyone engaged and be able to share some information on a global basis, because most of our focus today will be on those individual anecdotal stories. So it'll be good to hear from everybody a few times throughout the session. Now, I know some of you are joining us by audio only. And although you are not able to participate in that instant polling feature or use the chat box, we will be reading out everything like I just did that's happening on the screen. And I also want to let everyone know that the session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available for later viewing for those who aren't able to join us live. So if you know of a family, student, parent that would benefit from this, please, once you receive the follow-up email with the recording, feel free to share that with them. I also want to remind everyone that this session is being simultaneously interpreted into American Sign Language and into Spanish. And we also have a live captioner providing closed captioning. So we ask that you try to please speak slowly and clearly so our interpreters and captioner are able to capture and convey all the important things that you have to share. And I am guilty of speaking very quickly, so I need to try and keep myself speaking at a slower rate as well, but I'd ask that you all try to be conscious of that when you're sharing, so that we're able to translate or interpret everything that you're saying. I'm also going to go ahead and repeat directions for how to access the Spanish interpreter in Spanish. Again, my Spanish is not amazing, but hopefully anyone who is Spanish only will be able to understand enough to switch over to the Spanish interpretation audio feature and then be able to hear from someone who is very fluent in Spanish. Para escuchar la interpretación en español, seleccione Interpretación en la parte inferior de la pantalla y elija Español. Dependiendo de su método de unirse a la reunión y la versión de la aplicación de Zoom, puede ver una opción para silenciar el audio original que le permitirá escuchar solo el español en lugar del audio simultáneo. Si escribe en español en el chat, alguien traducirá su pregunta al inglés. Out of respect for everyone's time, this session will last no longer than 2 hours. It is possible that not everyone who would like to speak today will have a chance to do so, but we do still want to hear from you. That's why we have created an online survey that asks parents, students, and families to share their distance learning experiences with us. So if you don't get a chance to speak today, but you want to share your stories, we ask that you please complete this survey so your voice can be heard. And we will be posting a link to the survey in the chat box near the end of today's session. We will also include the link to the survey in the follow-up email that you will receive after this session. And the survey is available in both English and Spanish. We also ask that you please share the survey with other students and families who you know have stories to share or questions to ask, but who are not able to join us today. The purpose of today's listening session is to lift up the voices of students and families from communities across the state about experiences with remote learning, including successes, challenges, questions, and concerns. As organizations that advocate for students and their families, we want to understand what school closures have meant for you. And based on what we learned during today's session and from the survey, we will be identifying the most common questions and topics of concern to be the focus of the second and third sessions in this series, when we will be offering information, resources, and doing our best to answer your questions alongside other advocates and officials from the community. On your screen right now, you should see a slide with 8 questions in English and Spanish. In order to provide structure to today's listening session, we will be asking families to focus their contributions on answering these questions. We know your families have many concerns during this difficult time, but we would like to keep the focus of this forum on issues related to education in light of COVID-19 school closures. We will be going through these questions one by one with a set amount of time dedicated to each question in order to keep us moving. To give as many people as possible a chance to share, we ask that you keep your contributions brief and to the point. The hardest part of my job today will be having to cut you off so that we can give others the opportunity to share. You can respond to these guiding questions in the chat box, and our moderators will read out some of those responses. Or you can ask to be unmuted by using the raise hand button on your screen, or if you're on the phone, you can press *9, and that will let us know you would like to share verbally. Our moderators will be unmuting one person at a time to speak. All right, so let's get started. Our first guiding question asks, what types of distance learning opportunities did your school provide while schools were closed due to COVID-19? For example, work packets, online learning, phone calls with teachers, etc. And we do ask that before you begin speaking that you share what part of the state you live in, so you don't need to be super specific, but if you could share northern, central, or southern Arizona, and if you're comfortable sharing your child's age and their disability, that would be great. So does anyone want to raise their hand to answer question number 1?
Okay, I see a hand raised from Loretta. Loretta, I'm going to unmute you now so you can share.
My end. There we go. My name is Loretta. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. I have two grandsons. One goes to a public school and one goes to a charter school. During the COVID-19, the charter school was very organized as far as classes. They had 4 classes a week with their teacher for an hour, and then they had their specials. The public school where my other grandson goes, who has the learning disabilities and needs the special help, was very disorganized. Most of the classes did not happen because the teachers had a meeting to go to, or they didn't send the links, or they were using Google Classroom and the links didn't work. The charter school used Zoom like you're using. We had no problems with Zoom. He did not receive any of his special ed until the last week of class. The last 2 weeks, he had 3 half-hour classes. He fell farther behind than what he made up for in the short time that the school was in session. What are they doing to help these kids?
Thank you very much. In the chat, I see a comment from Anginette. We have online learning, distributed iPads, and learning packets, they write. I see a hand raised from Elizabeth. Elizabeth, I'm going to unmute you now.
Hi, can you hear me?
You sound good.
Okay, super, thank you. Let me turn on my camera here. All right, thank you. So I appreciate the opportunity to participate. I'm in Northern Arizona. Did you want me to state the city that I'm in?
If you want to share, you can, but you don't have to, whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, sure. I'm in Flagstaff, Arizona, and I'm the mother to my son, who is 11 years old, who is diagnosed with Down syndrome. And so my son, it took about 3 weeks to gear up from the school, and they offered a digital learning hub that parents could access. I requested that he actually interact with his teacher, and he had one 15-minute session with his teacher per week. And then in the last 2 weeks, that was increased to twice per week. He had one 15-minute session with his physical therapist per my and I requested this interaction with a physical therapist, one 15-minute session with his OT, and one 15-minute session with his speech therapist. I requested that he engage with parapros and be given a little bit, some tutoring time with them, but that was not something that was provided. We provided the technology. If we didn't have the technology, I believe they would have provided us with the technology. And so that was the extent of it. I did request more, but it was late in the semester. I mean, I requested it earlier, but it was already late in the semester by the time everything was geared up. And so that was what I described as what we had.
Thank you very much.
And I requested ESY for the summer, but it was determined in his IEP that he was not going to be eligible for ESY prior to COVID. And I advocated for him to have ESY, but according to the IEP prior to COVID, he was not going to be eligible.
Thank you.
Sure.
I don't see any hand raised right now, but we have a few comments in the chat I'd like to read. See, Elizabeth in Tucson writes, our school serves kids with autism. We did a mix of online packets and up to 10 hours in home for some students who would not benefit from online when families were receptive to that. Bernadine writes, Goodyear, Arizona, 11-year-old, autism, MID, ADHD 1. We had grade level packets. The special ed teachers shared some packets that were more level appropriate, but did not address her goals. I received generic emails from the speech and OT that were not goal related. We had 2 opportunities to Zoom once a week. One was social and one was a reteach of skills covered already. Angelica writes, depending on the district in Pima County would depend on the model of distance learning. In some districts, it was school packets. Others were meetings in Zoom or like 1 to 3 times a week. Interactions with therapists also varied. They were through video conference and very limited all across school districts in Pima County. Karen writes, my twin grandsons, age 13, have behavior issues which were not addressed during this distance learning. One has a 1-1. They attend special school with transportation. Nancy writes, Central. My son is in 5th grade. I only received links to websites, received only 1 single worksheet, which was not appropriate for his level. Zoom meetings and phone calls were few. I requested Zoom meetings with his paraprofessional, and then we had 2 meetings, which were very helpful, since he spent 6 hours a day, 5 days of the week with her. Claudia writes, Vale School District, 17-year-old, autism. Received packets modified to his level. Calls from his teacher every Friday, daily Zoom meetings with paraprofessionals. Cassandra writes, my son had Zoom with his teacher once a week to start with, and then his SP teacher also met with him and his group once a week when the OT called us. My son is 10 with ADHD behavior.
Thank you all so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. I do want to keep things moving, so we're gonna go to the second question. The second question states, how often and in what ways did your child's school communicate with you during school closures? For example, via phone, email, text message, paper mail, home visits, etc. So does anyone want to either raise their hand or press *9 on their phones to ask to speak, or you're also welcome to type in the chat box in response to question number 2.
Cassandra in the chat box shares Zoom, phone calls, texts, and emails.
Got a video raised hand, Jody Owen. Gonna unmute you, Jody.
Okay. For our school, I'm from Northern Arizona, and they use phone calls, emails, Facebook videos, and then my son's class also did a parent group through Google Classroom. They also use the Remind app.
Great.
John.
And Jody, how often did you hear from someone at your child's district or charter?
Actually often. He was in 8th grade, and they had already previously used Google Classroom, so all the kids were set up. So it seemed like the transition happened fairly well. It looked a lot better than my daughter, who was in 6th grade. It took them a while to get it up and running, but for him, it actually worked really well. And the children could have pretty much daily contact with someone if they so chose to do so.
Wonderful, thank you.
All right, I'm going to go back to the chat a little bit. Claudia writes, Zoom, emails, and phone calls. Teacher would phone us, school would email us. Elizabeth shares email. Bernadine shares Goodyear, 11-year-old. We got weekly emails from the teacher, 1 call from the school. There were a couple emails from the school district during this time. Nancy shares, mostly emails, a few Zoom meetings, a couple phone calls. Paulina shares, weekly phone calls, emails, Zoom meetings were also an option. Kathy shares, We got frequent texts and weekly emails from my daughter's special ed teacher and paraprofessional. One email from specials teacher. Nothing from any of her non-special ed teachers. Emails, phone calls, at least one from OT, PT, speech. Eugenia shares Central, kindergarten, niece. Weekly packets, most mail. All communication was in English and unavailable in Spanish. Amelia shares recorded phone call messages and emails in Tucson, Arizona. Kara shares, we are from Chandler, 2nd grade. We had 2 Google Meets a week for both general education and special education. We had almost daily phone calls, 1 to 2 times a week. We had emails almost daily and phone calls 1 to 2 times a week. Lindsay shares, Central Phoenix, 1st grader. Daily communication with the teacher, response to emails within the hour, 3 times weekly classroom Zoom meetings, weekly one-on-one Zoom meetings with teacher, weekly emails from the principal, and weekly emails and phone calls from the district.
That's great. Thank you all so much for sharing. Is there anyone else with a raised hand for video or over the phone?
As a reminder, if you're on the phone and wish to raise your hand, you dial *9 and your number will pop up to the top of our screen.
Okay, I'm gonna do another instant poll. So this is another chance for everybody on the call to respond. There will be a screen that pops up for you in just a moment. And the question for the instant poll is, what is your preferred method for receiving communication from your student's school? And I gave a few examples. Unfortunately, with the instant poll, we can't do other and have you type in your own response. But of the ones we've listed, which include US mail or through the post office mail system, email, phone calls, text messages, video calls, or when safe and feasible, in person, which is your preferred as a parent, family member, or student method of being contacted by your school about what's going on, updates about safety, school reopening, or information about your child and their learning.
As people are voting, Elizabeth shared in the chat, communication from the school district depended on the school. The district sent out an email once per week notifying parents of the new materials on the digital hub. School principal used robocalls and social media. Teacher communicated during her weekly 15-minute session. All communication was pre-recorded. I initiated personalized communication. There's also a question in there for you, Amanda, I think.
Okay.
Debbie asked if you want professionals to answer the poll.
So no, not at this time. This question is, I did say for all participants, but I should have clarified. We are looking for how parents or family members or students enjoy their preferred method of hearing from schools. So thank you for clarifying. But I do also recognize that teachers and professionals will also have a preferred method of communicating with families. But just wanted to hear from students, parents, and families what is the best method to reach them or how they prefer to hear from schools. Thank you for clarifying.
So I think Eugenia shared in the chat, I think she's kind of filling in the other category. She says packets could have been mailed rather than forcing all the single working parents to miss work to pick up packets during the day. Essential workers were not necessarily considered.
So I'm going to read out the results from our instant poll. We had about 55% of people voted, but in large part that's likely because many people on the call are not parents and chose not to participate in this poll as a result. So in answer to the question, what is your preferred method for receiving communication from your student's school? About 1% answered via US mail. About 66% answered via email, and that was the clear majority of individuals prefer receiving communication via email. 13% responded via phone calls. 10% responded text messages. 6% responded video calls, and 4% responded in person. And I totally recognize that often it's nice to have a combination of these methods, but we wanted to see what everyone's #1 preference would be. And it sounds like email is a good method for a lot of people. So thank you all for participating. We are going
to round out, Elizabeth shared in the chat that if its preferred method for phone calls would be not pre-recorded, something that would allow for interaction.
Thank you, Elizabeth. All right, so I am now going to go ahead and read number 3 on our question list. What was most successful for your child during distance learning? And I definitely understand that there were a lot of challenges, but for this question, I'd like to hear what worked well for your child. And if you have more than one child, feel free to comment on both experiences. What was most successful for them? So please feel free to raise your hand through Zoom, or if you're on the phone, press *9 to request that we unmute you so you can share.
So Bernadine shared in the chat. Well, I should mention that Sarah kind of echoed from the last section, some challenges with pre-recorded calls. Responding to prompt 3, Bernadine writes, Goodyear, 11-year-old, nothing. The Zoom calls she loved, but was so excited to see her friends and talked constantly, and then had more behaviors when they were over. Krista writes, my son loved the YouTube videos that were often set to music that were shared in lieu of instruction. He watched them several times. I think we have a raised hand. John, can you handle that? Can you unmute Jody?
Sure can.
Okay. For my son, because the classroom was already utilizing Google Classroom, and everybody had they already had like their emails and their accounts established, I felt like they were able to kind of start up right away, and that was successful. The only thing new to them was the Google Meet, and so they were still able, they already had like all their assignments in there and things that they were working on, and were communicating a lot with their teachers through email. So I feel like because that process had already been initiated while they were attending school in person, that it made the kind of the transition to be more successful because the kids were already familiar with that platform.
Okay, I'm gonna share some more comments in the chat. Ken writes, distance learning / video learning did not work for my son. Carolyn writes, Scottsdale, grade 10. Some teachers provided feedback through Google Classrooms, and my student was able to go back in and rework assignments. Cassandra shares, when we hired a tutor for him, so she could spend time with him to give instruction on how to do his reports. Julie shares, live, direct instruction was best, but it wasn't nearly enough. Chandler, age 11, OHI. Sarah shares, 7-year-old, highly gifted, HFA autism / ADHD. My daughter's teacher was very helpful. Came by the house to drop her work when we were available, and her one-on-one offered to give her weekly tutoring one-on-one. Maria shares, the feeling of not being forgotten. Our principal for our elementary school dropped off packets for us, brought us food, and our high school teacher brought us turkeys and some school items. Our home caught fire in January, and our insurance policy left us homeless for our family of 10, 8 kids. Julie echoes, we also hired a tutor to help with packets. Shayna shares, many of the parents I have talked to say the video conference was great, seeing their teachers and peers. Claudia writes, getting packets that my son is familiar with and having his work modified. Kathy shares, 10th grade, Phoenix. The only thing that seemed to work was one Zoom ceramics class. My daughter seemed to recognize the teacher or her voice. Nothing else really worked. Nancy shares, Mesa, 11-year-old son. Our speech therapist emailed extremely helpful packets that I am still using. Otherwise, it was me, providing personalized instruction, which worked well once we got into a groove. Kara shares, Chandler. The remote learning required an increase in communication and partnership to occur between educators and parents. The team approach resulted in my daughter's ability to succeed. Claudia writes, daughter, 6-year-old with severe delays. What worked was her teacher did not give up. And every day we worked on establishing my daughter's new routine. 30 minutes with teacher, and then 30 minutes with paraeducator. It did establish time, but then I did see it become easier on my daughter and I. And then the school ended. Maria writes, I reached out for assistance and help in both laptops to share and hotspot over and over. Was told to look into Cox. I'm not sure how that was to be done when we had no water or electricity. Paulina shares, Central Arizona, 11-year-old. Google Classrooms. Video interactions was the best way for my son to receive instruction. Brittany shares, we're from Central Arizona. My child is 5. Zoom conferences with the teacher and class were most successful. My daughter enjoyed seeing her classmates and interacting virtually. Her teacher sent out weekly emails outlining what activities would be presented during upcoming Zoom conferences. This allowed me to prep materials for my daughter so she could be involved with the lessons. Amelia writes, son with ED number 1, none. He ended up dropping out of college. Son with autism number 2, only Zoom because of the direct interaction with his science teacher. This was the only Zoom class offered out of all of his 6 classes. Son with ADHD 3, direct email and phone calls with teachers and me, the parent guidance. Loretta shares, online learning was very unsuccessful for my 6th grader with special learning needs. Teaching was not consistent in our public school through Google Classroom.
Thank you for reading all those out, Nick. Oh, I see one more that I can go ahead and read from Elizabeth. My son loved the video conferencing session with his teacher. It was also difficult because it was only 15 minutes. We hired a tutor because it wasn't enough. We as parents were the main teachers and the tutor. My son longed to interact with his peers, and that was never an option. Jill writes, Peoria, 11-year-old, Down syndrome, C setting. Packets and files were not individualized. There was no direct instruction. What he did receive, he was familiar with, which was helpful. There was a weekly email and a weekly meeting with teachers and students to share a good thing of the week. Oh, and then she corrected, not 11 years old. He's in 11th grade, actually. All right, does anyone want to share through Zoom or over the phone? As a reminder, if you want to share through Zoom audio and video, you can click to raise the raise hand function under the participant window. And if you are on the phone, you can press *9 to indicate you would like to be unmuted. Okay, let's go on to the next question, number 4. What was most challenging for your child during distance learning? And I know that we've heard a little bit about that already, but if you would like to share, especially if you haven't had a chance to share orally yet, if you would like to use the raise hand function or *9, we can unmute you and hear from you through the video. Or if you would like to type into the chat box, we would be happy to read out your answers that way.
Elizabeth writes, my son wanted to connect with his paraprofessionals, and that wasn't an option. Electronic materials not personalized. IEP work was minimal. I see a raised hand from Krista. Krista, I'm gonna ask to unmute you now.
Hi, my son is in 1st grade in Mesa, and he has autism, and he's in an inclusion placement. So for us, our big struggles were task initiation has always been something he struggles with, but he also struggles with fine motor, and our school used Google Classroom. I think the teachers did an amazing job transitioning given the circumstances. But for him, dragging and dropping things on Google Slides was a really big stressor, and it resulted in a lot of meltdowns. So I had to sit with him and do all of his schoolwork. And I also teach full-time myself in a different capacity. So that was extremely stressful both for him and for me, because he wanted to do it by himself, but he couldn't physically do it.
Thank you.
Much, Krista. I really appreciate you sharing that.
I'm going to keep going to the chat, but if people raise their hands, I'll be sure to jump over and get to hear some voices. Bernadine writes, Goodyear, 11-year-old. Lack of routine, missed friends, did not understand what was happening, lack of appropriate level work. All right, Jody, I'm gonna unmute you now. You're unmuted.
For us, it would have been engagement. The teachers did a really great job in using multiple strategies, but for him to engage virtually and there being really no accountability. So once I tried not to let him figure out that he wasn't really being graded, but as an 8th grader, his friends definitely shared that information. So once he really knew there wasn't any accountability, he pretty much checked out.
Carolyn writes in the chat, inconsistency. Most teachers use Google Classroom, but some used Microsoft Teams. Some teachers gave all assignments on Monday, which were due on Friday, but others posted assignments throughout the week. It would have been much easier if they all used the same platform and timeline. 10th grade student with autism. Cassandra writes, everything. Sitting still while on Zoom was almost impossible because he was fascinated with himself on the screen. Sarah echoes, I'm in the same boat as Krista. Kathy writes, Phoenix, 10th grade. Most challenging, everything. For our daughter, who is hearing and vision impaired and significantly cognitively challenged. Claudia writes, lack of consistency in therapies. Also, when my daughter was not as attentive during the time slot as she was allotted a day for Zoom. Nancy writes, Mesa, 5th grade. No virtual contact with his peers in special education. No contact with paraprofessionals until I asked. This was difficult for him to understand. I see a hand raise. Elizabeth, I'm going to unmute you now.
Great, thank you. So the challenges were the actual digital platforms. Some use Google Hangout, others use GoToMeeting. The time frame of 15 minutes for instruction or 15 minutes for therapy was challenging because by the time we transitioned and said hello, it might have been 8 minutes of actual instruction or therapy. And so that was difficult. And then just matching what was being done in the lesson with what was available on the digital hub for everyone in the district. There was not a connection made there. And so that was challenging. And then also just not having interaction with peers and with the people he's used to, the parapros, was difficult because he really wanted to have that interaction with them.
Thank you for sharing, Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Krista writes in the chat, sensory overload on class Zoom calls was also common. 1st grade, autism. Julie writes, Chandler, age 11. It was a disaster. Serious mental health challenges, resistance to working with parents / refusal to work. Kara writes, initially it was difficult to access the general ed classroom and lack of socialization. The most important part about being in general ed was, quote, being in, unquote, the general ed classroom. Not being there was tough. With teamwork modifications and once Google Meet began, it became much more engaging and successful. Brittany writes, physical therapy services were most challenging during distance learning. Virtual PT was difficult to execute digitally. Central Arizona, 5-year-old daughter. Cece writes, 8th grade son with autism. My son is missing the one-on-one help to keep him on task and to follow through. The Zoom calls were good, but not only to ask questions for better understanding, not really guiding through the work. He also had to use more than one platform that he'd never used before. It's as frustrating and difficult to do without me sitting there for him the whole time. Amelia writes, for all 3 of my sons, it was not being in the classroom where they could see, hear, and ask direct questions. As stated earlier, My oldest ended up dropping out of college because it was too stressful to understand virtually the classwork. My second son ended up having a severe meltdown when I updated him from his teachers that only 2 weeks were left for him to finish his assignments. My third felt overwhelmed with the virtual assignments and didn't want to start the assignments on his own without the usual teacher and student interactions. Claire writes, Southern Arizona, 11-year-old. Sensory overload and lack of focus equated digital with games. Flagstaff, 11. Yes. Sarah writes, no gen ed social skills support or peer connections was very difficult for her. HFA, autism.
Thank you all so much for sharing. Is there anyone else who would like to share verbally? You can raise your hand on Zoom by clicking the raise hand button, or if you're on the phone, you can request to be unmuted by clicking *9. Looks like we are getting a couple more in the chat box, and I will go ahead and read these out. So Bernadine said, Goodyear, 11-year-old. Distance learning is not an option for my daughter. She cannot do Zoom, not learning anything in that format. If forced to do distance learning, she will not learn as she cannot sit still and pay attention to what is going on without touching every button on the computer. My daughter needs a better option. Maria writes, internet service was a huge challenge. What good were laptops without being able to go somewhere for free Wi-Fi because of the quarantine? Then my high schoolers drove to the school parking lot in order to finish schoolwork, just to be told by security they must leave. How do homeless kids even have a chance? All right. Moderators, did you see anyone with a raised hand?
I think, yeah, Jill wants to speak.
Okay.
So I'm going to find you, Jill, and unmute you. Just hold on.
Okay. Thanks, Nick.
I got it, Nick.
Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I was on the wrong question last time. So I just wanted to share one good thing, if that's all right. My son's 11th grade, Down syndrome, definitely needs one-on-one support, which I pretty much was providing at home. But one thing that was really beneficial is he'd never used student email before. And it kind of was shocking to me when I thought about it, that he hadn't and all these other students had. So that was actually beneficial that he was now using some of the systems that all of the students were using. So, so that was good. And I continue to realize they're not really doing that with the students in the self-contained program and using the tools that all students use. So that's something I think they're going to continue to do. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jill. And that's, you know, good to know that this might be a tool to use all the time, not just during distance learning. So thank you for sharing that. All right, does anyone else want to share before we move on to the next question? All right, let's go to question number 5. And this, Jill's point kind of segues well into question number 5. So if schools have to close and use distance learning again, what is one recommendation you have for what schools can do differently? So now that we've all experienced this in an emergency situation, what lessons have we learned? What could we carry over? So for example, teaching all students to use an email program so that they're able to do it if we have to go back to a distance learning model. Anyone else have recommendations for things that could be done differently or lessons learned from this experience? And again, please feel free to press the raise hand button and we will unmute you, or if you're on the phone, press *9 and we will unmute you, and feel free to type your answers in the chat box.
Sarah shares, allow teachers to communicate with students in the manner they prefer. Limits were put on my child's teachers. Jody writes, that they have some sort of online platform they are familiar with before making the transition. Krista writes, first grade inclusive placement with support in Mesa. Long term, if we were to stay online, my son would need some sort of direct support from someone other than me. Cassandra writes, have the teachers spend more time with the students per day, not just 1 hour per week. Stephen writes, parents might pool their assets like homeschool families do, and then have a good teacher teach small groups. Jamie writes, I think finding a way to do more small group work between the students would be helpful. Anita writes, there were no guidelines from my district regarding how many hours we should have been expecting students to be engaging with our specific classwork. Students' capacity for learning online is much different than their capacity to learn in person, so I think it would have been valuable for all stakeholders to be provided with research-based guidelines regarding how many hours are reasonable to expect someone to engage with each of their individual subjects per week during distance learning. Julie shares, there were way too many platforms, Flipgrid, Clever, Google, Journeys, etc. Claudia writes, more time for therapies and more time with teachers and paraeducators. Brittany writes, clear and concise communication.
Great, thank you all so much for sharing in the chat. I see a couple more coming in. I do want to just ask again, if you'd like to share verbally, please feel free to press the raise hand button and we will unmute you. Or if you're on the phone, press *9 and we will unmute you that way. I can go ahead.
Go for it.
Okay.
I see one hand raised from Elizabeth. I'm going to unmute you, Elizabeth.
Go for it.
Thank you. So I echo all of the comments so far, and so for the future, certainly one digital platform, whether it be Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever is going to be used. Definitely some assistance for parents because, you know, I need it to be at every single one of my son's sessions. If not me, then the tutor that we had. And then also just, it needs to be mobilized a lot quicker. Like it would need to be ready by the start of the semester. It took a few weeks to get mobilized in my school district. And I also think that the engagement with other children from the classroom and from the parapros, and also making it very interactive on the video. So ahead of time, if that's providing the material and the lesson that's going to be utilized for that particular day, that it be sent ahead of time so that we can do prep work even before that. And so I think this obviously was a really heavy lift, and I felt like it was very disjointed and disorganized. So there'd have to be a lot more organization, a lot more planning.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. And I think, you know, you hit on a really good point. This was a crisis and fully unexpected, but what have we learned from it? And you had a lot of really great questions. So I think, you know, if we're in a situation in the fall where we need to continue with distance learning, these are things that should be thought through, and a plan needs to be in place so that all our kids are able to access instruction. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Yep, Maria jumped in and while you were typing wrote, I agree. Having to download different programs was a disaster. Between Google Classroom, Zoom, etc., we would have been nice if per district one program could have been utilized. Homes with multiple children to be able to have adequate time with children when sharing one computer. More than anything, most teachers were understanding, minus a few teachers who made no exceptions during these times, which only added extra stress, and you were left to take any time away from others. Julie writes, special ed teachers must provide instruction. Special ed teachers must provide instruction. Mine wanted my daughter to call if she was confused. She doesn't know what she doesn't know. Nancy writes, consistent routine. Routine Zoom meetings with teachers and peers. Invite paraprofessionals to interact with students one-on-one, which they are accustomed to. Direct therapeutic services from speech-language pathologist. Claudia writes, small group work for engagement and more interactive. Valeria writes, schools should be required to find ways for teachers and non-English speaking parents to communicate effectively. Spanish speaking parents have to rely on their other children in school or on family members who speak English. If they do not have their option, their student has to learn on their own. Loretta shares, Phoenix, 6th grade. Consistent times for the times for classes. Sending an email 5 or 10 minutes prior to the start of class does not work effectively unless you are checking emails constantly. Classes were hit or miss and not consistent. Cynthia writes, effective communication and technology training for parents. Language accommodation for parents, families, households. Mike writes, suggest sharing comments, suggestions, and recommendations with schools, administration, etc. Valerie clarifies that she's in Phoenix, PVUSD.
Thank you. And I'm thinking that Michael is asking us to suggest that parents who have these comments, you should reach out to your schools or administrators. And I would echo that. I think, as this session today, we are trying to gather information about what everyone's biggest concerns are and your questions, and we are going to try to address those in our next 2 webinars, and we hope that you will come back and tune in for those. But a really good point is made by Michael that what's super important is that you share this at the local level with your school, your child's school and district and charter, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who will most benefit from hearing about what worked and what didn't, so they can implement that going forward. And I will say that, I think the Arizona Department of Education has recommended that school districts and charters hold sessions kind of like this, town hall type sessions to hear from families. So I would definitely recommend to all the parents on the call, try to find out if if your child's school district or charter is gathering information. We're trying to gather it on a statewide level, but what's most important to you is your child's school district or charter. So definitely try to keep open lines of communication, find out if they're submitting or using their own surveys, doing their own town halls where you can share this information. But we really appreciate hearing it from you and hope to be able to provide you with some valuable information in our next sessions as well. So thanks for that, Michael. And Nick, if you want to keep reading what's in the chat box.
Sure, yeah, Krista just echoed what you shared and suggests everyone attend a school board meeting, ! Share with the board, ! Everyone needs to know, ! Andrea adds that she thinks that's a great idea.
Great. So does anyone else want to share for number 5, if schools have to close and use distance learning again, what is one recommendation you have for what schools can do differently? And as a reminder, you can raise your hand by pressing the raise hand button if you're on a device, or if you're on the phone, you can press *9 to request that we unmute you.
So Sarah shares that she was told that Zoom and technology-based learning was not really an option except for special needs students in our district. She felt bad for teachers.
All right, I'm not seeing any hands raised. So we're gonna go ahead and move on to question number 6, but if you want to address question 5, please feel free to, we can always go back and talk about that. So question number 6 says, do you believe your child's IEP or 504 plan was followed while schools were closed to the extent safe and possible? For example, was specially designed instruction and related services provided to your child? Were accommodations provided to your child? Were special education evaluations completed, etc.? And again, if you would like to speak, press the raise hand button, or if you're on the phone, press *9.
We had one more comment on the last prompt. Diane shared, support for parents when they have to support their child in their learning. Not all parents have the knowledge of all the various curriculum that is being taught. Helping the parents to be able to be that support will be less frustrating for the parents who are now the teachers. And then let's see, Bernadine, then we're answering your question. So your question was, do you believe your IEP was followed to the most reasonable extent necessary? Bernadine shares, no. No goals were ever addressed in academics or related services. Goodyear, 11-year-old. Maria, absolutely not. Kathy, no. Phoenix, 10th grade. Julie, Chandler, absolutely not. We got one modified packet during the entire quarter. Cassandra, I think she tried her best, but no. Jody, I do feel they did the best that they could do given the situation. My son, Dyslexia DX, had daily scheduled sessions, and then 2 sessions were designated with his resource teacher. The resource teacher was readily available if other times were needed. Modifications were still made for assignments. I felt that teachers were accommodating and did the best they could to try to engage all the students despite the multiple challenges they were faced with. Luckily, we had just had our annual review prior to school closing. Elizabeth, my daughter's school actually provided more specialized services than was written in her IEP. Her school did a fantastic job with services for my daughter. Cynthia, both our IEPs were completed, but that is all I can speak to. Claudia, Vale School District, yes. Nancy, Mesa, 5th grade. No goals addressed, no modifications, no direct instruction. Elizabeth, Flagstaff, no. Jill, 11th grade DS. We decided to postpone the reevaluation data collection. Sarah, we had our IEP via Zoom and it was very good. The teacher and para-professional were great, but the district was not even attempting to get in touch with any parents. It took 6 weeks to get a copy of the IEP. I had to email the special services director.
Thank you all so much for sharing in the chat. As a couple more come in, I just want to remind you, if you'd like to share verbally, you can press the raise hand button on your device, or you can press *9 to unmute your phone.
Kara writes, Chandler, I feel that the educators did the best they could. Her educators and speech did incredible. I feel that the OT fell short.
All right, thank you so much. And we will keep all your concerns in mind as we plan for our next 2 webinars where we will try to address some of these concerns. I will read the 2 that just came into the chat, and then we can move on to question 7. So Krista writes, speech goals, yes. We had regular Zoom meetings with the speech language pathologist, but not with the special education instructor or occupational therapist. The Freckle platform that our special education department chose to use was not a good fit for our family. Loretta writes, Phoenix, I have 1 child in 4th grade at a charter school. They did very well considering the short notice of the schools being closed down. He had 3 specials and 1 OT each week. My other child is in 6th grade at a public school. He received 2 20-minute sessions of IEP services in the last 2 weeks of school. All right, I don't see any hands up, so I'm going to go ahead and read out question number 7, but if you do want to speak about question number 6 or respond in the chat box, you're welcome to do so. Question number 7, what general questions do you have about the 2020-2021 school year? Please do be aware that many operating decisions for next fall will be made on a school-by-school basis, And for those specific questions, you should contact your child's district or charter, but we would like to know what concerns you all have going into the next school year. So again, if you'd like to share verbally, please go ahead and press the raise hand button or press *9 on your phone, or you are welcome to type in the chat box.
We're going to go to Krista, who has her hand raised. I'm going to unmute you now, Krista.
Hi, everyone again. So just a reminder, we're in Mesa. I have a first grade son with autism. Well, sorry, I should be saying second grade now. It's going into second grade. And he's in an inclusive placement. Excuse me. I also have a 2-year-old with medical issues that's at very high risk for complications from coronavirus. So we're really in a tough position because if he goes to school, if my older son goes to school and gets sick and brings it home, then we have issues. Part of it is, my concern is that regardless of whatever plan the school has next year, I want to know that my son's placement in an inclusive classroom isn't going to be impacted if there's progress or lack of progress because of all of the changes. We fought very, very hard to get him into an inclusive placement, and our school is amazing and our teachers are amazing. And I just fear that, you know, that lack of progress or anything else could jeopardize our placement there. And so bigger goals, that's kind of my concern.
Thank you. Bernadine writes in the chat, good year, 11-year-old. My daughter needs a non-digital option. The schools need to meet the needs of every student. Digital learning is not for everyone. What resources will we have access to in order to help our children get a setting that they can succeed in? Julie asks, Chandler, I have a concern for students, teachers wearing masks, as my daughter has a speech and language disorder. Wondering how masks will impact that. All right, I'm going to go to Loretta, who has her hand raised.
My question is, right now, the school district that we're in, the public school is stating that they're going to go to a 4-day week and close on Fridays so they can clean the classrooms. What is to keep everything out during the 4 days that they are in school? What are they doing to protect the kids? What are they doing to protect the kids walking onto the school grounds? How do we know these kids aren't coming in sick? And you know, what are they going to do to help them keep up to speed if they're only going to be there 4 days a week? What are they going to do to get them back up to where they're supposed to be? Because my son fell way behind, my grandson fell way behind because he didn't have his special ed, his one-on-one. He learns better one-on-one. That's why we have an IEP. How do we get all of this going? How do we help these kids? How do we make sure they're going to be safe?
Thank you, Loretta, for sharing that. I will go ahead and read Julie in the chat box shared. Oh no, I'm sorry, that was read. Sarah in the chat box shared, how can those of us who are educators and parents of children with special needs be asked to manage both roles? I feel that I might have to choose between supporting my child and making a living.
So Stephen's comment, I believe, was responding to Loretta's comments, suggesting to hire an attorney. Cassandra writes, will the kids have temperatures taken before getting onto a bus if being transported? Kara writes, I agree with Julie. Chandler, my daughter has a speech and language disorder. Wearing a mask will limit her progress. I also worry about limitations in having my daughter involved in the general education classroom if socially she has regressed.
Is there anyone else who would like to share orally? You may press the raise hand button on your device or press *9 on your phone to indicate you'd like to be unmuted.
Claudia asks, How to ensure with all the new guidelines that our kids will not continue to fall behind? What can we expect and what will be the accountability of it? Bernadine shares, sure, parents can pull together to hire extra tutors and teachers to help our children progress, but some of us are barely making it, and that's what we rely on the schools for. I'm going to go to Amanda, who has her hand raised.
I'm a single mother. I work for the state. I'm a DDD support coordinator, and I have a son on an IEP with behavioral. His diagnosis is ADHD and social emotional. The school, he's in a charter school, and in the Peoria area, which did a really awesome job helping out with resources. Though, again, I believe another mom had mentioned, and I'm a single parent, so I don't have the finances to hire a tutor. I do have an educational background. I am a teacher. My struggle was working my job in the crisis, which amplified my workload, and then being able to teach. I'm afraid I'm gonna have to choose either my son's education, both of my son's education, or my job, if there's gonna be any type of, I don't know, something. I know that my job is doing a really awesome job trying to work with me, but if they're gonna go back to school and they're gonna go back to online learning, how much more my job's gonna be able to work with me, and for me to be able to be there for family members that have children with special needs as well, because I'm their support coordinator, but also be able to be there for my own child at the same time, because it was definitely, they were put on the back burner. And they have play therapy, they have sessions that I have to sit in with them to do these things. I'm not sure what support is out there for a person like me with one income, 2 kiddos, and one on an IEP, and then dealing with my community, which is also this community as well, which is children with special needs. So I can't hire an attorney because and I can't hire tutors to be able to come in the home. I'm wondering what other resources we would have to be able to help support our children, but also I have to work to be able to maintain those things. So.
Thank you so much, Amanda. We really appreciate you sharing that, and we will strive to address those concerns in our next sessions and share the resources we know about. But I think everyone on this call can agree that this is a really tough time for a lot of families, and some families are affected much more than others by what's been happening, and we do need to look for solutions to help those families. So we will do our best to help, but I echo what you say, that there's a lot of need, and I hope that we can work together to address the need. So thank you for your willingness to share.
In the chat, Debbie shared a link to a Keen Phoenix program at the YMCA for special ed. She shared a link to a Facebook page where you can learn more about it. Krista asks, how can we advocate for additional funding at the state and federal level to ensure that our schools have the tools necessary to meet the needs of our kids? Jill asks, I wonder about sports, band, cheer, etc. My son thrives on the interaction and general education band class. It's his joy. The social interaction with peers is so important for normal development. It's a sad situation. Nancy writes, I understand everyone faces a different reality. However, my son with Down syndrome will not tolerate a mask. He reads facial expressions much faster than he can process words. People wearing masks is very difficult for him. Speech therapy will not work if his therapist's mouth is covered. These are the things I think about. Elizabeth writes, it was a very difficult situation. I am very concerned about my son's academic progress, his health, and the responsibility the school has to educate our children who are differently abled. Our teachers need to have the support from the district to work and educate our students in this new reality. School districts also need to understand what is required of the district to meet the responsibilities of educating children with special needs. I'm also concerned about my son contracting the virus, considering he has a compromised immune system.
Thank you all so much for sharing in the chat. And I just want to repeat that if you are interested in speaking, you can indicate that to us by pressing the raise hand button, and we will unmute you on Zoom. Or if you're on the phone, you can press *9 and we can unmute you so you can share that way.
So Julie suggests for future sessions to cover compensatory education. Stephen, I believe, is sharing an idea with Nancy, who spoke about difficulties with masks, and Stephen suggests consider using a clear plastic face shield instead of a mask. I see a hand raise. Kathy, I'm going to unmute you now.
There, am I unmuted now?
You sound good.
Okay, good. I just wanted to say that I can't see where we are. So I'm going to mute us then. I do not know what to do, absolutely 100%. I don't know what to do. I'm echoing what a lot of other people are saying. The distance learning does not work for my daughter at all, but going to school with the possibility of getting the virus will not work at all. I don't think she would do very well wearing a mask because she doesn't get a lot of oxygen the way she breathes. So that just seems scary, but not wearing a mask seems scary. Usually I am a problem solver. I can figure out what options are good options to do. And I am 100% befuddled by this. I do not know what to do. And I think if I was forced into a corner, I would just opt to keep her at home and just kind of forget about school because it ain't going to work for us. And I know that sounds terrible, but I don't know what the answer is. So anyway, that's us.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for sharing that. And Maria in the chat box said ditto. So you are not alone. Cassandra also said, I agree. So others are feeling the same way you are about that.
So we had a few more agrees there with that verbally shared comment. Diane also asks, will there be an opportunity for parents to choose distance learning if there's no vaccine and school opens? Jill shares, it would be nice for ADE to extend empowerment scholarships, timelines, etc.
Thank you for that, Jill. And I will share that our next webinar, we are going to have representatives from ADE. I don't know if they will be able to answer that exact question, but I think it will be a good opportunity to hear from those state representatives about the different steps that they're taking at a state level to try to address a lot of your concerns. So that is something we will keep in mind as we design topics and questions for our next session. So thank you.
I'm going to jump in here real quick. There is a participant, her name is Debbie Kret, and she has a clear plastic face shield. If you can scroll down to her video, you can see her put it on. So there's some options out there. Yep, she's just showing it off.
Yeah, I can have a whole career as a model there, Debbie, I think.
No. Thanks, Debbie.
All right, does anyone else have questions or concerns they'd like to share about the upcoming school year? We got one more in the chat that I will read. Sarah says, would districts be required to pay for one-on-one support if they do not provide it? It's something we can talk about in future sessions. Bernadine, Bernadine is answering number 8. So does anyone else want to speak on question 7? And I'll just repeat what that question was. What general questions do you have about the 2020-2021 school year? And if you would like to speak on that before we move on to our final question, you can indicate that by pressing the raise hand button on your device or pressing *9 on your phone, and we will unmute you so you can share verbally. All right, I'm not seeing any raised hands, so we will go ahead and move on to question 8. It's the final question on our screen. What school closure related topics would you like to hear more about in our next 2 sessions? Again, you can press the raise hand button on your screen and we will unmute you, or *9 on your phone. Or you may chat in the type in the chat box. Thank you.
So responding to that latest prompt, Bernadine wrote, what services can be provided via virtual platform? How will parents who work and are being required to return to work help their children if a digital platform is continued for the 2021 school year? What resources are there to help me determine if and how to request compensatory education? Maria shares, more Wi-Fi options for families who choose to do distance learning.
So I do want to share that we will be addressing many of the questions we've already heard and trying to answer them to the best of our ability, going over some of the themes we've heard today. But anything else that you would like to hear more about from us in our next 2 sessions, please feel free to share those by typing in the chat box or requesting to be unmuted by pressing the raise hand button or *9.
Loretta shares, I would like to know if they will actually be teaching the students if they have to go virtual. Will the teachers be more knowledgeable regarding online teaching? Will there be consistent class schedules? Maria asks, are elective classes like orchestra going to be included in virtual? Sarah asks, is it possible to find out if statewide Wi-Fi access could be provided?
These are all great questions. Thank you so much for putting them in. I see another one just came in from Kathy. What specifically can we as parents do to figure out the best options for our children? Kara writes, how will both the parent and educators be supported moving into next year? Will parents be provided with training to support our students from home? Brittany writes, if school resumes in person in the fall, can distance learning continue to be an option for medically fragile students? Please do continue to type in the chat box, or if you would like to be unmuted, you can press the raise hand button or *9 on your phone. I'm gonna go ahead right now and post links to our survey that I referenced at the beginning of this session. So we have a survey in English and in Spanish. If you were not able to share today, or if you know of other families that have stories that should be heard, please feel free to share these surveys with them. There's an English and Spanish version that I'm posting in the chat box now, and I will post them again in a moment, but I do want to read some more of the comments that came in on the chat box. So Stephen said, school districts make a lot of money through Medicaid billing for special needs children. What will happen to these funds? Nancy says, I understand Mesa Public School District has work groups exploring options for next year. I would like to know if parents with special needs or special education teachers are part of these work groups. Vicky said, ditto, I think regarding Brittany's comment, what if parents are afraid to send their child back to school because of medical issues? Cassandra wrote, what will happen if school starts back up and they get to put back to virtual learning again? Andrea writes, do you want the survey to be filled out if we are not a parent? So you are welcome to fill out the survey. It does ask if you are a parent, family member, or a student, but it really is intended for those three categories: parents, family members, and students. I want to reiterate that I really appreciate the huge number of teachers, providers, administrators who have tuned into this call and have listened to the concerns of families. But the intention of this survey and the listening session was really to get information from parents and families. And we would encourage everybody on today's call to please tune in again for our next two sessions on June 25th and July 2nd, where we will be providing more substantive information and resources, and we will be hearing from representatives from, as I said, the Arizona Department of Education, and we're hoping to have some representatives from individual.
We lost you, Amanda. If you can, we lost the last 20 seconds.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep, gotcha.
Sorry, bad internet, technical difficulties. I apologize. Anyway, we really appreciate all of you tuning in, and we are looking forward to having our next two sessions where we will provide more substantive information and resources. We will also have presenters from the Arizona Department of Education. We're hoping to have presenters from individual school districts and charters to talk about their reopening plans, and we will present many of the questions we got today to those stakeholders, and we hope you will join us for those sessions as well. We really appreciate all the nice comments in the chat box. Did you see any more questions?
Yeah, just two more questions, I think. I'm not going to read all the self-congratulatory thank yous, but I do appreciate them too. Loretta asks, what will the schools do to help students who need more one-on-one instruction if they go to virtual teaching? Eugenia asks, if online and email education has to happen, will there be after-hours help for working parents? Elizabeth asks, how will the missed learning time be made up to our students? We need additional resources and supports. And then Stephen shares, parents and teachers need to spend more time accessing the services of raising special kids. Sarah wants more special education hiring.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. I'm going to go ahead and just post one more time those surveys because we would really love you to share them far and wide so we can collect more data and use it to inform our next two sessions. And I will do another little plug that we have our next session is going to be on June 25th, which is a Thursday at the same time, 3 p.m. And the final session will be on July 2nd, which is the next Thursday, again at 3 p.m. Thank you all who participated for your willingness to share, your bravery, your openness, and We will, to answer Maria's question, we will be emailing the links to the surveys as well. So when you get a follow-up email, it should have information about how to access a recording of this entire webinar, and then links to those 2 surveys will be included. So we really appreciate everyone's participation. I want to thank all the teachers and administrators from schools who were on the call listening. We really appreciate that, and I appreciate your willingness to keep this space open for parents to share. I know that a lot of you probably had answers or things you wanted to share, but I think it was really beneficial to make this space available for parents and families. So thank you for doing that. And we do look forward to hearing more information and answers to these questions from you all. Let's see. We'll have the questions before joining the next webinar. Yes, you will have access to those survey questions before the next webinar. All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you all so much for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you again on June 25th at 3 p.m. Thank you.